I get it, nobody's got questions. The real reason we came is because like bands and chains, I got it, right? So before we get to bands and chains, we're gonna get into a little bit of programming, and I don't wanna get too deep because we can go down a programming rabbit hole for like 5, 6, I could probably get 8 hours out of it. So in short, when we're going from off-season work to trying your best to get a PR or a personal best, personal record, or a new max, right? Generally, for my athletes that are non-competitive strength athletes, we don't max very often, maybe 2, 3 times a year. And if that, it's probably a 2 rep or a 3 rep. And that way I can get a little bit of information as we're kind of phasing through. A 3 rep gives me just about as much information as a 1 rep for most athletes, right? Unless you're a strength athlete, specifically Olympic lifting or powerlifting or strongman or carnival tricks or odd lifts if you're into that. So generally 3 reps is enough information to give me like your maximal load / limit strength before I get into like dangerous territory. When we're prepping for getting ready for a max load, right? Or getting ready for a PR, or getting ready for a new personal attempt, what would those be? So let's give some examples of a new PR, right? Anybody? Somebody? Personal best, personal record?
Weight.
Right, so a weight record, right? So a new 1 rep max, right? So new 1 RM, right? So that's one way to tell is the load on the bar. What's another one?
Rep range.
Rep range, right? So we can do like a rep PR. So like previously I've hit 225 for a triple, and this time I hit 225 for 6. So that would be a rep PR, right? And then generally, there's some other ones. What are some other PRs, personal best, personal records?
Increased ROM.
Increased range of motion, right? So we can work on, yes, I hit my 315 squat, but this time it was significantly further to depth. The quality of the rep was better, right? It's just cleaner. Clean or more technical, right? And then there's one more, and this one's not very much talked about, but time, right? So what do you mean by time?
Hitting it the fastest.
Bar speed, right? So like, yeah, I didn't PR my actual by putting on more load, but last time it took me 3.1 seconds to grind out this 400-pound deadlift, and this time it was a clean like 1.2 seconds. That's definitely a PR. That's definitely a personal best. That also is definitely an increase in strength in some version or definition of the word strength, right? Most of the things that we talked about have something pretty much in common, right? They're all gonna be like maximal, and they're all gonna be, we'll say, generally low rep, right? Yeah, ish. So, to get ready to prep for a low rep, I need to learn how to peak myself efficiently, right? So again, we talked about this as some types of PRs, but let's say I was working a program and my program was a 10 by 10, and at week 1 I'm at 100 pounds, and week 2 I push it barely up to 105, and eventually I work my way up to 120 pounds for 10 sets of 10. If you guys did the math, that's a significantly amount more weight moved in one single session, right? Definitely got stronger. But did my 1 rep go up? Yes, no, maybe?
Not by much.
We don't know yet, right? So your 10 by 10 goes from 100 to 120 or 125, 130, then your 1 rep probably went up. But I would say that if you went right from this 10 by 10 and then tried a 1 rep max, you're probably not gonna be very efficient, right? So generally when we go for some sort of attempt, we wanna move from variation, right? Which can be like generalization also. And we wanna move towards specialization, right? So if I am constantly working on like a safety bar, or I'm working my front squat, and my front squat goes from 300 to 400 pounds, I've definitely got stronger, but I probably can't next week put the bar on my back rack and think I'm gonna PR that back squat with it. I need to make some sort of transition back towards, from variation back to specialization, right? So away from generalization, back to specialization. And if you guys are competitive athletes or strength athletes, this is where your off season should be, right? And then as we get closer to competition, we get here, right? So safety bar, bow bar, duffalo bar, all types of accessory movements that are mimicking the movement of a squat or a back squat, but not necessarily, or like hang power cleans, right? Something that mimics my competitive lift, right? But not necessarily exactly on, right? So then as we get closer, our lift should transition to closer and closer and closer, right? So for a power lifter, specialization would be doing a 1 rep max, right? 1 single rep inside the gear that you perform. So if you're a wrapped lifter or like classic raw, right? Then if you're training a 1 rep max in sleeves, that's still variation. That was a hard one, sorry guys, right? Because it's not what I compete in. Does everybody kind of understand what I'm going with? If I go even to a 2 rep max in my wraps, it's still variation because it's not what I compete in. I compete in 1 single rep, so everything away from that would be variation. It doesn't have to be so crazy that it's like a safety bar, overhead, reverse back squat lunge, right? It doesn't have to be that far deep down here, but everything away from 1 single rep in my sleeves would be variation. So again, I'm getting super sciencey, super technical with a lot of powerlifting jargon, but when it comes to athletes, let's talk about the other side, right? So everything away from what I compete in would be variation. So like a 1 mile run for a football player, it's variation. They don't compete in the 1 mile run. You're probably not ever gonna do a whole mile on a football field ever. Unless you had 1,600 yard touchdowns, but that's not happening, right? So that would be variation. That's conditioning work, off-season work, farther away from it. When we're thinking about in the gym, prepping for a 1 rep, right? Let's just slowly 1 rep max. That's as special as we can get. Working a 3 rep max, still variation. Working 3x3s, still variation. A 5 rep max to 5x5s. So if these are as far as I get away from, and we can keep going, guys. We can go 8s and 10s and 12s and 15s and 20s if you're a bodybuilder, right? But if I look at it on the reverse, if I want to peak for a 1 rep, then I have to do the opposite here, right? I can't go from this 10x10 to this 1 rep. I can maybe spend 4 to 6 weeks in the 10s, then I go 4 to 6 weeks in the 8s, maybe 4 weeks in the 5s, go for a 5 rep, another 4 weeks in the 3s, then a 3 rep, right? Then I start hitting some singles, then I can display the strength that was gained in this volume over here, right? So again, as we go through this workout, the load or intensity increases as we get closer to specialization, and then the volume decreases, right? So we got 100 reps here, and we have 1 rep here. So warming up, we probably get 150-ish reps. Warming up, you might get 20, 15, right? Before we get to our heavy single. Again, if you guys want to get deeper into peaking, there's tons and tons of programs. I'm not going to get into like percentages, waves, undulating waves, bounce rubber band waves, block waves. There's so many ways, triphasic, right? There's so many ways that we can train peaking, but generally, as a generalization, we're gonna move from a high volume, low intensity, to a high intensity, low volume, right? We don't wanna take the guy who's been running miles and miles and miles and miles, or long distance, even if he was a cross-country athlete, and then be like, hey bro, change of plans, you're running the 40 yard today. And they're gonna be like, well, that's not gonna help me. I'm not good at that. I don't speed up until I'm already 1,600 meters deep. So again, when we think about that, we can't just decide to willy-nilly go for that 1 rep. It's just never gonna be there unless you're properly peaked and phased for it. It has to move in this wave so that you can accurately display that strength. So again, if this 10 by 10 goes up, we know we're getting stronger. Like if you guys stay in the 10s and 12s and they keep moving, you are getting stronger. Will it correlate right that moment to a 1 rep? Maybe not. We need to accurately peak, right? So the further I am from competition or my attempted PR, the more volume, the lower the intensity or the quote unquote load. The closer I get, the lower those reps start chipping and the higher my intensity or load gets, right? And again, there's a lot of different ways. You guys can look them up. Westside, Conjugate Method, Jim Wendler's 531, Chad Wesley's Juggernaut, Starting Strength from Mark Rippetoe, tons of great coaches, right? Matt Wenig is doing your programming. I do all my guys' programming. There's tons and tons of coaches out there, and there's generally a million ways to skin this cat, but they're all gonna look like some form or variation of this. Is this what we've come to see pretty much, Ray, as you're going through programming? How many programs have you seen throughout your years? Right, and they generally, maybe they do like 6s and 7s instead of 5s and 8s, but it generally kind of looks like this wave, huh? And then we test, right? And then any good personal trainer should be doing this all the time, right? We make an assessment, we train, then we test, then we assess that results of those tests, we train those weaknesses, and we repeat, right? Assess, train, test, reassess, continue, right? That's how we get better at things. That's how you get better at school. That's how you get better at writing. That's how you get better at powerlifting, football, etc., right? Questions before we get into bands and chains, guys? No? No? We're ready for bands and chains?
What's your favorite system?
Ooh, my favorite system. So, my favorite system is my program. So I generally run 6 to 8 weeks, and it's usually run for close to 2 or 3 years. And then I take an athlete, which I believe has a fundamental foundation built up, and then we could start working different types of waves, and I work strengths and I work their speeds. I'm paying attention to very intricate weaknesses like lockouts and what type of athlete they are, if they're explosive, if they're slow, if they're a grinder, if they're mentally motivated, if they're emotionally motivated. So all these things I'm kind of taking into play, but it usually takes me quite a while to figure out that. Unless I have like an advanced athlete come to me and then we're gonna train differently. But I do have my foundational block, which we pretty much follow pretty similar here at Missing Link for strength. But after that, it would be silly for me to just slap the same label on everyone. So when I program for people, I have a foundational block that once I feel like they've got enough built under them, then we start getting into some crazy stuff. But for myself, I've run 531 for like 5 or 6 years in my Marine Corps career. It got me pretty strong. I also kind of dabbled into Juggernaut. And then again, after programming for Missing Link for so many years, I've kind of followed my own path. Some things that you guys might want to look at if you're trying to look into your own programming is called Prilepin's Law. Sure. You can spell check that, guys. So he was I want to say a Russian scientist, right? So this is right around like the strength wars where it's like Russia versus America in the Olympics, right? So he's doing tons of research. Now, there's some caveats you guys should pay attention to. The research that he's doing is on non-general population. So these are all athletes, right? They're all like farm-bred athletes. And he decided that specific loads, and he's got a percentage in a chart, and you can look it up. It's Prilepin's chart, Prilepin's law. Specific loads were in specific rep ranges and specific maximal attempts of sets, and it's got it all broken down. And you can kind of look at how most programs are laid out. They kind of follow this law loosely. Again, keep that in mind because these are Olympic athletes, not powerlifter or bodybuilder or general sports, right? Performance athletes. So take it with a grain of salt. A lot of guys kind of use it and a lot of guys are like completely against it, but it's a good starting block for like how many reps you should be able to hit-ish at what percentage. Does that make sense? And that, I kind of used that, again, when I was younger to kind of like mold my way through things.
We see that in the strength, the CrossFit, right?
Yeah, so when you guys see strength and you guys generally are like man, it's exactly hard 1 rep before I'm supposed to be done, like 6 sets of 8 at roughly 60, 65%, right? Questions on programming, guys?
When is enough weight for an average athlete?
When is enough? So, that's spicy.
Soccer mom.
All right, so when I'm training athletes slash soccer moms slash humans, general pop, the goal is minimum required volume to create a stimulus. So I don't want to go, quote unquote, balls to the wall with someone, and then I have to go, in theory, balls to the wall +1 for the next session. And the next session I have to go balls +2, +3, right? And eventually we get a crash. So if I can see at 3 sets of 8 that this athlete is like getting ready to call it, then I'm probably pretty close to that volume. Minimum required volume is something that you guys will have to test around yourself. So basically we have minimum required volume and we have maximum recoverable volume. And that's like your threshold. Inside of that pocket, hey, this will create a stimulus. This will take too long to recover that they can't train efficiently for their next session. Regardless if we go like upper body, lower body, push, pull, legs, like, and we play those games, their DOMS slash central nervous system slash tax is gonna be too much to recover. You're gonna get the text the next morning like, hey, I can't come, I don't feel very well, right? So we wanna find that pocket, and that pocket is, I can't give you said numbers on those because of, for myself, I'm quote unquote a strength endurance athlete, being martial arts and jiu-jitsu. I need to be able to go multiple rounds for long times. So I'm pretty good inside my pocket where I can go tons and tons of reps, but I'm not so decent on the top end. Like my torque is kind of missing. Vice versa, powerlifters, you tell them anything more than like 5 reps, they're gonna be like, come on, bro, really? This is ridiculous. And then bodybuilders, you tell them they're hitting like a triple, they're gonna be like, the triple, what's that gonna do, right? So everybody's individual when it comes to minimum required volume. So that's, again, enough to create a stimulus for growth, and then maximum recoverable volume, and that's gonna be too much, and we're gonna overload the system. Does that make sense? Sweet. So getting ready to get into chains and bands, guys. Awesome. I'm gonna erase this. Can anybody give me some reasons, other than it looks cool on Instagram, why we would want to train with chains and bands?
Sticking points.
Sticking points, that's a good one.
They make cool sounds.
They make cool sounds. Resistance.
Low speed eccentric.
Ooh, that was good. That was very good. All right, I might skip over overspeed, but we'll put it on the board. Overspeed, sticking points, resistance. Did I miss one, guys?
Different variation.
Variation, right? Variation. It's very important.
Time under tension?
Yeah, not generally, but we could do it. Could do time on attention. Yeah, I'll put time on attention. I'll go over that in a second. Time on attention is not a bad one. All right, guys, so bands. We're gonna knock out resistance first. So the first reason we would like to use bands or chains is because of accommodating resistance, right? I'm gonna show my age slightly. You guys remember Nautilus machines? Right, I'm old. So Nautilus machines where back in like the 70s and 80s, and there's some gyms that still have them, but they have a cam kind of shaped like that on the machine. And through science and discovery, they realized that like peak contraction, actually we get stronger through that range of motion, and it makes it a little bit more difficult by going over this cam. So you guys would see like this rubber strap go up and over the cam. Has anybody seen a Nautilus machine? It goes and it rides over. So generally, if we think about an exercise, let's say a squat, it's really hard right here, like at the bottom, and then we can quarter squat like 1,005 pounds, right? So that being said, once I get to this top here, the exercise is actually getting easier as I start up, right? Same thing with like a bicep curl, right? We get the hardest part is getting it past 90. Once it's past 90, we're like, yeah, we just get it past there, right? Which is why we pretty much all do this little hip heave, right? So, Nautilus had a good idea, right? By adding this cam and trying to make it a little bit more difficult in this spot where we're past and we're losing tension on the exercise, right? So if you think about like a pec deck, where like out here, it's hard, but like in here, it's like super easy, right? Because the machine is just inefficiently designed, right? So we can do a band, because it's accommodating resistance, right? If we set up a band at the bottom and we tether it to the top, then it's gonna add resistance, and as we move through that exercise. So I'm gonna show you guys a bunch of ways to set up bands and chains. Chains and bands both do accommodating resistance. But basically, as I get up, the band gets tighter. So it's following my strength curve, which is great, which means I have less opportunity to like gain momentum and shoot through my squats, right? So yes, adding resistance, accommodating resistance specifically is why we would use bands and chains. Variation, it is absolutely a variation, and I will show you guys different variations of bands so that you can still have multiple. So like, if you think about it, when we do bands, chains, straight weight, bands, chains, straight weight, and then you change the way you tether your band, we could basically run 12 to 26 weeks with never doing the same specific squat more than 3 times. So variation, boom. Resistance, boom. Sticking points, yes. So like generally the sticking point, again, talking about that strength curve, happens kind of like right here. So like Nautilus had a great idea. Bands help us push through those sticking points, right? Generally working on compensatory acceleration, right? So we talked about this before, but generally when I lift, I should always be putting the maximum amount of pressure into my bar. Even if it's 135 pounds, if you watch an elite level deadlifter, that bar goes through the roof at 135 pounds, because they're always gonna put the maximum amount of tension into that bar no matter when they touch it. Helps build speed, helps push through sticking points, right? Inertia, momentum, etc. Sticking points. Time under tension. So we can eccentrically carry more load than we can concentrically, right? Have you guys ever done negatives, right? Every time you're doing a negative, your muscle is firing. Generally more motor neuron pathways, motor recruitment in the eccentric than there is concentric. That's also why when you're doing like bodybuilding movements, we generally fail concentrically first. Like if you're doing bicep curls, you usually can't lift it up, but if your buddy lifts it up, you can usually lower it back down a couple more times, right? Because eccentric, we usually have more motor patterns. So I can increase that time under tension by adding a band and making them eccentrically fight that position, right? Or I can add a band to improve the athlete's eccentric motion, right? Now, depending on your sport, a faster eccentric motion, so if we're talking about plyometrics, we're talking about stretch reflex, right? The muscle has a tendency of wanting to come back to its neutral position. So if I can stretch it faster, it's gonna snap faster, essentially therefore increasing the amount of velocity upwards. We can get super sciencey, get into overspeed. I don't want to get too crazy, something we can talk about later, but generally if I can speed up the eccentric under control, then I can speed up the concentric, which is why we use like depth jumps and stuff like that to help build power. Cool? All right, lastly, wrapping up bands. The guy who like brought us bands, we all claim Louis Simmons, the guy who brought bands, but he brought bands to powerlifting, but a guy, Dick Hartel, is the guy who basically introduced Louis to bands. They were at like a rehab clinic technique, etc. And Louis saw the bands, tried a couple things with them, and he immediately was like, this is something we need to get into right immediately, right? When I'm programming bands or chains, I generally, again, the further out I am, I'll do chains. The closer, I'll do bands. And then I'll remove the bands, we get ready for competition. Bands generally pull in one specific straight line. They got elasticity, they pull straight down. Chains, because of their linked and they don't have an attachment point, they swing a little bit. So they're a little bit more dynamic, and also when each link falls, you never know which way the link's gonna fall, right? So like one link could go this way, one link could go this way, and you kind of have like this Jenga block going on, right? All right. Questions on why we'd use them, how we would use them. I'm gonna show you guys setups here in a second.
I guess you kind of touched on it with the chains, but I guess all of this also helps like your stability for your lift.
Right. So the chains are a little bit more dynamic, definitely gonna work a little bit more stabilizing muscles. Bands, generally, they can use stabilizing. It really depends on your attachment point. We're gonna have to get into that in a little bit. When I'm programming, I generally use roughly 20 to 25% of the lifter's max in bands. There's only one way to know how much band tension you have. You have to measure it. So you can go to the website and look it up. It's not going to be very accurate because we're all different heights. We all attach them to different things. This little fancy doohickey is like $30 at like Harbor Freight, and it's basically a large fish scale. You could use a fish scale if you're using lighter bands. This one goes up to like 300 kilos, so we can get a ton of band tension. So generally, I'll measure them for the wave, and we'll keep that wave for 3 to 6 weeks, and we'll remeasure the next set. Questions, guys? Super fancy. You also don't need them. So if you don't want to use them, you can use a little cute starter chain, right? We can use a cargo strap, a tether strap, something. We just need something that's going to hold some weight. And again, we're only going to be using 20, 25%. So even a 500-pound squat is only going to have about 100 pounds of chain, right? So when I set my chains, they're very specific. You're definitely going to want to squat normally with people the same size as you. Can you do me a solid? We'll grab that other one, hook it up on this side too. Sweet. So some coaches or athletes, depending on who's kind of playing around with it, will set the starter chain and basically have double chain. So it's doubled over, right? I also have done it in the past where I'll set just one chain, and depending on how many chains we get, we'll have links on the floor, right? At lockout, which we're just going to assume that this person is at their lockout position, I would like about 2 or 3 chains on the floor. So if you see guys that are like completely coming off the floor, they're losing it, and then their chain's going to start doing like this, right? I want to be able to have about 2 or 3 links on the floor. And that's going to make that fall, and you notice it's going to fall in a different position every time. So when I squat, and that bar comes down, the chain's never going to land in the same position, which makes for very, very dynamic, right? So today, we might not all be able to get our chains in a very, very appropriate position. I think I got Ken pretty well eyed up. So when we're lining up, guys, we're just going to count links. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm waiting on my sixth one, right? 6. So again, if I have 25% of his squat already on the bar with just chains, then I probably never want to go more than 70% in bar weight, because then essentially I would be theoretically at maximal load at the very, very top, and then we're not going to be very efficient. Ken, you mind getting under there and walking that out for me? And step on back. Ooh, that's like almost 3 exactly. So at the top, Ken basically has we're at 135 plus 40, so like 175-ish. How's it feel at the top?
Not bad.
Sweet, and bring it on down a couple. And it's going to lighten itself on the way down. Very good spot for not being warm, and up. Right, and round. We can see it's starting to get a little funny, a little crazy, right? If you guys get a chance, I'd like you to get under. I can add more chains, take away chains. We can take away some weight. But for the current second, as we're still moving, I'm going to move down one and set up bands, all right? So when we're setting up bands, again, roughly 20%. So just from experience and roughly playing with these all the time, this is going to be roughly 24, 23-ish pounds when I double it over. So you guys can see, I'm going to double this band over the top, bring it on down here, and I'm gonna get roughly 20-ish pounds per side. So like roughly 100-pound squatter. So when I'm tethering these to the front, this is gonna encourage him to force that back up in this erect position. If I was on the monolith, these bands would be back here, stretched straight down. So again, this is a different variation of how I can set up bands. So again, this is gonna wanna pull you forward. So when you step back, you're gonna increase some tension. So go ahead and get under. Good. Just hit 2 for me. Push his knees out real hard. Get a little deeper. Ooh, see the band's fighting you, right? Good, one more. Good, right. What's it feel like at the top? A little bit, right? So if you guys wanted to and you already knew what your load was going to be, you could also grab super like 150-pound dumbbells and set them back so that it would have a more even load, right? I'm going to show you guys one other exercise. We're not going to squat today, but I just want to show you some banded variations. I could also work some deadlifts here. And now I'm encouraging using my lats to keep the bar close to my body, right? Just another banded variation. Guys, I got a bunch of band pegs over there, a bunch of carabiners, some micros. Like I said, one micro doubled over is going to be roughly 20-ish, 25 pounds. Keep that in mind when you're starting to build up your squats. Again, because it's tethered forward today, it's going to have a slight pull. So we only want to step out as much as we need. If you guys want, you can also grab big, giant, heavy kettlebells, set them back here so that your band has a slightly more up and down pull. Does that make sense? If you guys are like super into overload techniques, right? You can also set bands above my head to the bar. That way I can overload the bar so there's more weight on it. And when I get to the bottom, the bands will help me out of the hole. So again, if we have some sticking points, now we can use the band to overload the top of the squat in a slightly different way, right? So now I have heavy band tension at the top, or if I do reverse band technique, I have heavy weight at the top and less band tension. So there's a lot of different reasons. Like sometimes so say an athlete is a Highland Games or a strongman competitor or vice versa. There's no real need for them to squat past 90, right? Like their sport is above 90.
Okay.
Like if you guys ever seen a strongman squat all the way down here, their sport's generally like right here, right? Like an 18-inch range. So then we're building that top side of their squat because that's where it's going to be the heaviest.
Okay.
Also, we can do the flip side of that where we can kind of build some confidence by using very small bands and then going maybe at 102, 105% of their max so they can feel it.
Okay.
Sometimes just feeling the weight is enough for the body to make some adaptation to go to the next one.
Okay.
So sometimes in competitions, powerlifting competitions, I've had athletes where they've gotten under the bar and I can just see it in their head. So then what I'll do is I go to their next attempt and I'll add 10%. So like say the athlete's gonna try 400 pounds for their second attempt. I'm like, hey, do me a favor, load this bar to 440, just get under it and step it out. So they get under 440, step it out, rack it, then when the judges call their name and they get to the platform and 400 gets on their back, they're like, oh, that's not that crazy, and they can get under. Even if 400 is the most they've ever squatted in their life. A little bit of overloading technique, a little bit of central nervous system tricking, right? We're just confusing the body, letting them understand what the loads feel like. It's not very uncommon for Grego. It's not very uncommon for Olympic athletes to, from the jerk blocks, overload their clean by just doing front rack holds, right? How taxing on your core is a front rack hold.
That'll fuck you up.
It's miserable. So if you go to 125% of your front squat and then just try and walk it off the jerk blocks, your whole body is going to kind of start adjusting underneath that load. So we can kind of, again, we can use those to make some adaptations. I would say these are very sport specific, you know? I wouldn't use them for general pop. It's just not something that we just need to get into. But it is a good technique. It is a overloading technique of why we would give them some reasons to put more than 100% of the bar on.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, thanks.